RNZ Pacific with a bulletin of World, Pacific and Sports News. Kia ora, I'm Tim Glasgow. In world news, environmental organisations say China and India are planning huge increases in their coal production despite warnings from scientists in the need for drastic cuts to tackle global warming. A new report highlights a plan by more than half the world's main coal-producing companies to expand their operations. Environmental groups are urging more financial institutions to disinvest from coal. A new video has emerged of Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, wearing blackface a day after he admitted such behaviour was racist. He apologised yesterday after photos of two similar episodes, one when he was a teacher and another as a student, came to light. His Liberal Party says the video is genuine and dates from the early 1990s. Mr Trudeau has again apologised, saying he's now a different man.
Darkening your face, regardless of the context or the circumstances, is always unacceptable because of the racist history of blackface.
The revelations come during campaigning for the upcoming Canadian election, where Mr Trudeau hopes to win a second term. In the United States, the number of cases of severe lung-related illness linked to vaping has jumped by 40% in a week. Health officials say there are now 530 confirmed and probable cases, up from 380 a week ago, and there are no signs the outbreak is easing. 3/4 of patients are male and 2/3 are aged between 18 and 34. 7 deaths in the US this year have been attributed to vaping. The Food and Drug Administration says it has activated its criminal investigations arm to explore the supply chain of vaping products and identify the cause of the outbreak. It's now investigating more than 150 products and substances. And it's the latest world news. Pacific Regional News now. A Samoan academic in New Zealand says young local Pacific communities are leading a national conversation on climate change. Auckland University Associate Professor Damon Salesa says awareness of the climate impacts on the Pacific is still lacking in New Zealand. But he says young activists from the Pacific countries, and especially low-lying atolls, have been pushing for change.
So I think there's clearly leadership by the most vulnerable nations, which we've also seen at the global level. But there's also leadership, particularly from younger people. I think there's a clear sign that younger people are taking climate change a lot more seriously than perhaps some of the other generations.
Auckland University's Damon Salesa. Indonesia has told the UN Human Rights Council that it's taking positive action in response to racism against West Papuans. This follows a wave of protests and deadly unrest in Papua sparked by racist harassment of Papuan students in Java last month. At the Council's 42nd regular session this week, Vanuatu and Solomon Islands raised concern about racist discrimination towards Papuans. Andriano Irwin from Indonesia's permanent mission at the UN has responded. He says his government deeply regrets the incidents in Java and has consequently brought the perpetrators to justice.
The government and the people of Indonesia have been and will continue to take action to combat racism and discrimination, not only through a law enforcement approach, but also through education and effective public dissemination effort.
Andriano Irwin from Indonesia's permanent mission at the UN. Australia says Solomon Islands' decision to end 36 years of diplomatic relations with Taiwan will not affect the Pacific nations' bilateral relationship with Canberra. This week, Solomon Islands Cabinet voted overwhelmingly in support of establishing diplomatic ties with China, prompting Taipei to terminate their bilateral relations. Honiara has yet to establish diplomatic relations with China, but Beijing has already issued a statement welcoming the move. Australia is by far Solomon Islands' largest aid donor, with 187 million Australian dollars in official development assistance provided in the past financial year, according to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. A spokesperson from Australia's Foreign Ministry says They respect the sovereignty and right of the Solomon Islands government to make its own decision, and that decision will not alter the warm bilateral relationship between Canberra and Honiara. A Chinese university is to teach a number of Pacific Island languages, including Whanganui. The Australian National University's Development Policy blog revealed the Pacific Island Country Language Teaching Program will be offered at the Beijing Foreign Studies University. Dominic Godfrey reports.
The ambitious language program is linked to efforts to facilitate the rollout of the Chinese government's Belt and Road Initiative in Pacific Island countries, with whom China has diplomatic relations. Approved by China's Ministry of Education in 2017, Beijing Foreign Studies University started to advertise new 4-year bachelor's courses on 7 Pacific languages. These include Vanuatu's Bislama, Cook Islands Maori, Fijian, Niuean, Samoan, Papua New Guinea's and Tongan. These languages cover all of China's 8 diplomatic partner states in the Pacific. The formal teaching is expected to start soon. This is Dominic Godfrey.
American Samoan police have removed a rock barrier erected as a protest over controversial paving done in front of the Whangatongo Malay. Since a new pavilion was opened in the grounds of the Malay, the people of Whangatongo have been protesting over the paving of a large grassed area they consider sacred. The paved area is now being used as a parking zone. A school counsellor, Aitofe Solepo, who led the protest, says they will accept the police advice and not block the road again. And that's the latest Pacific Regional News. Now with sports news, here's Koro Vakauta.
Meitaki Tim, the Flying Fijians have played what they hope will be a trump card for tomorrow's Rugby World Cup clash at Sapporo, with the explosive Semi Randarandra shifted to the left wing. The former rugby league star has started all 6 of his previous rugby tests at centre, but has been given a licence to thrill in the same position where he scored 82 tries during a 5-year stint with the Parramatta Eels in the NRL. Fiji have only won 2 of their last 21 matches against the Wallabies, but coach John McKee says his team's excited by the opportunity to create history.
We know Australia are a very good team and present a big challenge for us. With our preparation, I know that the team is mentally and physically prepared for that challenge.
The Wallabies lineup also has its fair share of Fijian firepower, with second 5 Samu Karevi, winger Marika Korombeti and number 8 Isiena Sarani all named to start against their country of birth. A moment's silence will be observed before the start of Tonga's opening Rugby World Cup match against England on Sunday in memory of the late Tongan Prime Minister Akalisi Pohiva. Mr Pohiva, who died last Thursday in Auckland, was president of the Tonga Rugby Union at the time of his passing. Ikalitahi captain Siale Pilto says Mr Pohiva's passing gives the team added motivation to play well on Sunday.
No, after being by myself, there's a lot of things that he was able to change for us as players. Our condolences and our prayers and thoughts are with him and his family at this time. And back home in our country, but we hope that with the performance this week, we can maybe bring something back to our nation, and as players we're relishing at the opportunity.
Siale Pilto. Jason Taumalolo has threatened to retire from International Rugby League at the age of 26 if a dispute between Tongan players and the national board can't be resolved. A group of Matemata Tonga players have threatened to boycott the upcoming World Cup Nines and Test against Great Britain and Australia unless Chairman George Kolomatangi and Secretary William Edwards are removed from the local board. Behind the scenes, efforts to ease the tensions are ongoing. Taumalolo is eligible to return to the ranks of his birth country of New Zealand, for whom he played 10 tests before switching allegiances back to Tonga before the 2017 World Cup. But the powerhouse Cowboys lock told NRL.com that isn't an option, saying he'll stick with the Matemata Tonga or retire. The regional men's football Olympic qualifying tournament kicks off in Fiji this weekend, with the home side looking to defend their title in Lautoka and book their ticket for an historic second consecutive Olympics. Fiji made their first Olympics 4 years ago by defeating Vanuatu in the final of the qualifying tournament on penalties after hot favourites New Zealand were disqualified for fielding an ineligible player. Fiji coach Marika Rondu says although there will be pressure to defend their title at home, there are obvious benefits.
With the home crowd and home weather conditions, but it's about attitude, it's about getting the job done. So the idea is we want to be the second Fijian team making it to the Olympics, but it's a long shot.
Marika Rondu's team will meet Tonga on Sunday. And that's your Pacific Sports News from RNZ Pacific.
Hello, Akita. This is Dateline Pacific from RNZ Pacific. I'm Don Wiseman, and in today's program, New Zealand's Pacific communities want more climate change action for the atoll nations. A 15-year-old Fijian girl is heading to New York with a message for the UN Climate Summit. The Pahiva funeral is one of the biggest ever seen in Tonga. Solomon Islands province is surveying its appetite for independence ahead of the China switch. And in sport, a family first for the Kurandranis at the Rugby World Cup. Pacific communities in New Zealand say more attention needs to be given to the country's most vulnerable to the climate crisis. As Kiribati, Tuvalu and Tokelau battle rising tides, its youth are bringing attention to the plight. Kenzie Smith reports.
While Australia has been slammed in the Pacific over its climate change inaction, New Zealand has largely been praised. If nothing else, a full endorsement of climate agreements at July's Pacific Islands Forum in Tuvalu earned it the respect of Pacific leaders. But not everyone's convinced enough has been done to tackle the climate crisis where it hits the hardest, atoll nations. A youth advisor for the Kiribati community in Auckland, Rubina Tekanene, is worried for her people.
Sometimes I feel sad because that's where our roots come from, you know. So maybe one day I'm not going to hear Kiribati anymore, you know, because it's disappeared.
Ms. Tekanene says there should be more priority given to resettling those displaced by rising sea levels. According to the International Labour Organization, as many as 350,000 people from Pacific atoll populations are at risk of displacement. Not everyone's ready to give up just yet. A former Tokelauan public servant now living in Auckland, Heto Puka, says New Zealand needs to step up its efforts on climate mitigation. He says his people are frustrated.
The issue is a lot more about policy being driven from the government, where they take does it meet the needs and the concerns of the people on the ground?
A 3-metre seawall is all that protects Tokelau's 3 remote atolls. It recently secured New Zealand Foreign Ministry support in mitigating coastal hazards. Still, Auckland University Associate Professor Damon Salesa says New Zealand's response needs to be domestic as well.
It's just much more complex than just sending some money up to Tokelau to build something.
Others tend to agree. Next week, a student-led climate strike in Auckland will rally Pacifica activists in an event titled Our Islands Need You. Dr. Salesa says Pacific communities in New Zealand are leading a national conversation on climate change.
There's a clear signs that younger people are taking climate change a lot more seriously than perhaps some of the other generations.
That's the case for 24-year-old Tavita Nielsen Mamea, a Tuvaluan playwright. He says growing up, he always knew Tuvalu would disappear under the waves, and his play Ko Au Tuvalu is showcasing just that in Christchurch.
In the Pacific, the climate is taking away a lot of their homes. When you're walking around in New Zealand, you kind of take note of that and take note of everyone's stories, because it's hard to see in everyday reality, but everyone is kind of going through something to do with climate change.
Tavita Nielsen Mamea says New Zealand has an important role to play as a big brother in the Pacific. This is Mackenzie Smith.
Young people driving climate action around the world will get to showcase their solutions at the United Nations Climate Summit this weekend. Fijian student Anne-Marie Randuva will be in New York and says her generation is cleaning up a mess they did not create. The 15-year-old eco-champ says while her journey hasn't been easy, she hopes to return from New York more determined to lobby her Fijian government to review its Litter Act and classify balloon releasing as littering.
I'm doing this for my generation and the other generation after me. and this is the platform I hope to make.
Why do you think it is important that young people take their messages from around the world to the UN?
I expect the UN, the world leaders, and the representatives of the UN to hear our issues and our concerns about this climate change fight, because my island, my Pacific Island countries will be the first to be underwater, and my people will become the first to be climate refugees.
Tell us about your journey in this climate change fight.
Before my campaign, I started reading National Geographic magazine and watching documentaries, and this urged passion to be a protector and a guardian of the environment. We lived in Massachusetts for a while, and we had access to the seawalls and also to the beaches. But it was also an eyesore because we saw a lot of plastic that are carelessly thrown by people, and rubbish that are brought in by the tide. So my sister and I, my 12-year-old sister Faith, we picked up rubbish every school holidays, weekends, and even public holidays. Sometimes I get negative comments from my friends that why are you picking up people's rubbish? And I tell them it's about civic pride, that people from overseas will not come to Fiji and pick up our own rubbish. It is our responsibility to keep Fiji clean.
When did you actually start to think about your environment? How old were you then?
14.
And when did you start your balloon campaign, your No Balloon campaign?
November.
Tell us about that.
Balloons have the same effects as plastic. When you release a balloon, it travels thousands of miles away, and then what goes up must come down. The majority of the balloon fragments are scattered around the ocean surface. So once the turtles or fish or the seabirds see it, they do not know the difference between food and the balloon fragments, and they eat it, and it causes the animal to starve, and then it eventually dies. So it blocks an animal's gut. I started campaigning on no balloon releasing, and we took it to social media platforms, and I was shocked with all the replies and the comments, also with nasty comments. When I first floated the idea to my parents, they told me to pray about it. One of the things about the campaign is praise our pillars. My parents also wanted to protect me from the social media platform because of what people might think of my age and my gender, that I should be in school and study. But I was determined to raise my voice, although people say negative things about me. And then I started to research about the eco-friendly alternatives rather than releasing balloons. So that's when our mangrove initiative started, and then we organized a beach cleanup, and I was privileged to be invited by the IUCN Oceania Forum to speak as an eco-champ. It was my first time speaking in a conference in front of people. This New York journey has just started. I'm looking forward to meeting other young activists, and also to learn as much as I can, so that when I come back to Fiji, I am more vocal and I'm more determined to lobby for government to relook at the Fiji Litter Act 2008 and to classify balloon releasing as littering, and also champion this climate change fight.
It's Anne-Marie Renduva who spoke to Christine Rapoy, accompanied by her mum. The Premier of Solomon Islands' largest province has ever pushed for independence to maintain ties with Taiwan if there's public backing. Daniel Suidani says the people of Malaita are worried about what an impending diplomatic switch to China will mean for the province. On Monday, Taiwan ended a 36-year relationship with the country after Honiara endorsed a report to recognize China instead. In Malaita, the People's Resolution has been circulating, calling for independence. Mr. Suidani told Mackenzie Smith his people are not happy with the diplomatic switch.
The national government is giving its decision now to switch to mainland China, and we can't do anything. But our concern here is because we are the only province holding the majority, the population of Malaita, of Solomon Island rather. So we are so worried about what might happen if they pursue their idea and they believe in that democracy. So, but I remain to keep the people, to control them, to wait and see what's the latest development that can be happen if all militants and others who believe in democracy will continue to push for the rights to remain with Taiwan.
This resolution that's been circulating, it's calling for the granting of independence to Malaita province, and you're saying there that if it were to be independent, it could then recognise Taiwan and stay with Taiwan.
At the moment, that idea of independence for Malaita is yet to be considered, because it has to be something that the whole of Malaita must agree upon. The members, the executives will make sure, will go around and talk to the people in the rural place and everywhere in Malaita province, in these 5 regions, and we will see there what they are saying, because we have been with the Taiwan government as our traditional friend. But still, during that time, when Taiwan helped us a lot, we seems to, the government sometimes, not sometimes, every time, they promise us with later development that doesn't happen. So the people is now starting to get worried when this switch to mainland China has already happened. But then, if there is any changes that the national government can do to Malaita people, like to implement some major project, because we are worried so much about, we heard rumors and maybe confirmation that the Chinese government, when they give funding to country, it becomes a loan. So that makes the people of Malaita very frightened about part of that whole thing. But with Taiwan, for the last 20 to 30 years, they help us in giving us money for development through grants. So that is why these people here have seen the Taiwan has been offering to the people of Malaita as a whole, but then don't know how the switch of government to the mainland China happened without consulting the people.
That's the Premier of Malaita and Solomon Islands, Daniel Suidani. Several thousand people on Thursday filled Nuku'alofa's first Wesleyan church to overflowing for the funeral of Akalisi Pohiva. The Tonga Prime Minister died last Thursday in Auckland after being medevaced from Tonga the previous day. A correspondent in Tonga is Kalafi Mawala, who told me that while people knew Mr. Pohiva had been unmarried, his death still shocked many.
His death was quite taken with shock and taken with a lot of grief. The people that had supported him and the people that known him. And the funeral marked a very significant occasion. It was televised so that people from the Northern Islands all over Tonga was able to listen in to see what was going on in the funeral. The church, which is the Free Wesleyan Church, the main church, was absolutely packed with people. I estimated a little over 3,000 people that were there. The side wings of the church were also filled in and overflowing to the grass area. It was a very honored occasion. It was interesting that one of the chief critics of Prime Minister and his administration even issued a caution on social media in which he was asking everyone to stop any more political discussions or talk in any media, but that everyone was perfectly silent and honor his name. It was a very honorable occasion there.
So would you say this is the biggest funeral for a commoner in Tonga?
It would be one of the biggest. I've seen other funerals for the commoners, but the reason why this is big, of course, is not because of the family necessarily, but because every civil servant, every department of government and their staff, you're looking at almost 4,000 employees. There were most of them were required to be there. And so the funerals, of course, are mostly family occasions to which families will come from all over. But this was a very, very official, it was like a state funeral in which there was a lot of very important people. Queen Nanasipau was present, as well as Royal Princess Kakifui and all the nobles that I could work out, they were there, all the ministers and government officials. So, yes, definitely it was one of the biggest.
So, despite Akalisi for many years rubbing many members of the establishment up the wrong way, they clearly still had a lot of respect for him.
They do. They felt that the respect was the fact that he brought some changes, in fact significant changes to the political arena in Tonga. Even the things that he had criticized, you have to understand that even the establishment, who was a little bit reluctant in speaking out on issues, for him himself would speak out on those issues. And so there was a kind of a quiet support, an agreement, that those issues were very important, particularly in his stance that against corruption, and especially the fact that he felt that we need to move on and be more democratic in our governance. There needs to be a more sharing of power, and all the things he had preached over the years. Yes, he was definitely respectful. And it was surprising to see also the royal family this year, especially with a lot of attack on coherent supporters and the royal family and all kinds of stories that they had circulated, and yet the royal family was very encouraged in support of him. So it shows you that something.
That's Kalati Wara and Nico Alofa. To sport, and the Kurandrani family are battling with divided loyalties ahead of this weekend's Rugby World Cup clash between Fiji and Australia. Mother Inosi, sister Bulo, and brother Samuela travelled from Fiji to Japan to support Wallaby Centre Tavita Kurandran. Born in Suva, but has gone on to become a senior figure in the Australian team, earning 60 test caps since his debut in 2013. Bulo Kurandrani told Vinnie Wiley they all want Fiji to do well, but on Saturday afternoon in Sapporo, they'll be putting their family first.
It's a bit tough, actually, but, we're here for my brother, so we hope the Wallabies will win this weekend.
Of course, this is not the first time that your brother, Tavita Kurandrani, has played against his homeland of Fiji as well. So what's it like in the family when these sorts of matches come up?
We're excited because the last World Cup when my cousin played, Namani, that was a tough one as well. But that time it was whoever whatever team wins. But I guess this year we're hoping the Wallabies will win. Yeah.
So you have come over with your family to how many games are you going to get to watch, or are you going to go and see?
Well, that depends. We're actually booked for 2 weeks to stay here for the Wales against Wallabies as well. But if the Wallabies go through, then we might just extend our stay. But if not, then we'll go home after that.
And what if Fiji go through?
Well, my dad will probably stay for that one.
Are you both supporting Fiji, though?
Of course, yeah, of course. But like I said, there's divided loyalties,
And, there's a really strong Pacific influence in the Wallabies team, a lot of Samoans especially, but Tavita, a couple of Fijians as well. We see in the All Blacks, Sevu Reece as well, so I suppose it's nothing new to see Fijians on the international stage. There's talking to Singer in the England team, so there's Fijians everywhere, really.
Yes. Where I'm from, in Fiji, Namatukulu, we've had a lot of successful rugby players. Lotte Tungiri, we have Nona Drupu, so this is nothing new. We've always had, big rugby names, even from my village.
And you've obviously just arrived in Japan from Fiji. What is the feeling? Because there's a lot of talk that Fiji can make the quarterfinals this time, that this team, they've done it before, but it hasn't been since, I think, 2007. So what's the feeling amongst the locals and the fans? Is there confidence?
Oh, yes. There's a very big support back home for the Fiji team. Everyone is hoping for Fiji to win. Everyone is even hoping for Fiji to beat the Wallabies this Saturday. So everyone's excited back home. Yeah. The fee is huge, but also the support is huge. The excitement is even bigger.
But I guess it's always harder in the 15-a-side game, isn't it? Sevens, Fiji reigns supreme, but always harder. Is this perhaps the most confident that Fiji have gone into a World Cup, do you think?
Yeah, it is, yeah. We're pretty confident with this team, yeah.
And I guess in order for the Flying Fijians to make it to the quarterfinals, they have to beat Australia or Wales probably. So I guess this first game against Australia, aside from the family connections, is an absolutely massive game for the Flying Fijians.
Yeah, like I said, I hope the Flying Fijians really do make it to the quarters. Of course, we're excited for the team as well. And we're also hoping that the Wallabies will make it to the quarters. We just wish them the best. Whichever team wins.
That's William Kurandrani speaking to Billy Wali. The Kurandrani family is scheduled to stay in Japan for 2 weeks. But Willow says if the Wallabies make the knockout rounds, they might extend their stay. Well, Father Inosi is also willing to stick around longer if the Flying Fijians progress beyond the pool stage. Maybe Pacific. From RNZ Pacific, thank you for joining us. I'm Don Wiseman. Until next time, peace and multi.